All right, time to talk some hoops with Jovan Buha of The Athletic. He covers the Los Angeles Clippers and just happens to be from the great school located in Los Angeles, the University of Southern California. I may or may not have known Jovan for, gosh, I'm getting old, 10 years, maybe more?
Yeah, decade now.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so I wanted to talk with you, not just because you're my friend, but because as we look at the NBA restart, it's very possible the Mavs and Clippers meet in the playoffs. We'll get to that in a second, but I'm just curious from a basketball perspective, what are the things that jump out to you as most interesting with the restart plans now in place?
I thought it was really interesting that they went with 22 teams. I thought they probably should have gone with 20. I think adding in the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs didn't really make sense. Even the Washington Wizards, who are 8 games back in the East, I get it if they wanted to give someone in the East a bone and just say, we can't have only West teams, extra West teams coming. But I just don't like it's almost mathematically impossible for the Spurs and Suns to make the playoffs at this point. And they'd have to leapfrog so many teams over this 8-game span that, to me, it's just, you want to minimize risk. The NBA does not want to have some type of corona outbreak in its bubble and have teams decimated or staffs decimated, and have deaths and hospitalizations and all that stuff. So to me, adding in, having 22 teams felt like too much. I personally felt they should have just gone to the 16 playoff teams. If they want to have, some type of 5 to 8 game preseason or regular season, whatever, that's fine. But I think it was kind of clear what the 16 teams were going to be. They're still probably going to be those 16 teams. So maybe the seeding changes a little bit, but I just felt like 16 made the most sense, and it was the less risk that you were going to be taking on. But I think the play-in tournament's kind of interesting. It's not even really a tournament, but you probably have a 2-game series between the 8 and 9 seed. So the 9 seed would have to win 2 games. The 8 seed only has to win once. That could be interesting because I do think, looking at the West, if Portland or New Orleans gets matched up with Memphis, I do think they're capable. I think both those teams at full strength are better than Memphis, and I think either one could win 2 games in a row and potentially take the 8 seed. And that would also make the first round series against the Lakers more interesting. So those are the things I'm interested in. Obviously, we've never seen something like this. We've never had like a 4-month break between, this is honestly longer than than the average off season, at least for like finals teams. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what guys are in shape. We just saw Nikola Jokic, some photos of him. He's looking slimmed down. What guys are out of shape, who's put on weight, who hasn't been practicing. So I think that's going to be – and I think there could be a lot of risk for injury, having this type of break from playing basketball for a lot of guys, then going back to it, you could have some injuries. So I'm intrigued overall, but I'm glad we're going to have hopefully some resolution to this season. It would have been sad to not have a champion crowned. So I'm glad that at least is going to be happening.
I'm curious. So, Major League Baseball a couple years ago added the 5th playoff team in each league, and it's a wild card game. And if you win the game, then you get what it was used to be the more traditional playoff spot. And I think there's a lot of money in playoff basketball, playoff football. The playoffs generate more money. I wonder, do you think the NBA would consider sometime in the future, if this goes well, if there's excitement with what you talked about, like an 8-9 Portland Memphis series, which that's the one I think that I'd hope for. Do you think there's a chance that moving forward the NBA would consider utilizing that in a regular season, not the regular season, but a more traditional 82-game season without a stoppage? And hey, if you're within 4 games of the 8 seed, and you've got to be the 9th, so even if the 9, 10, and 11 are all within 4 games, you've got to be the 9th seed. Do you think they would implement that just to add, just in the spirit of continued growth, or do you think this is only a one-time thing and we're not going to see this again?
I think they'll reconsider it because you saw the Elam ending that was in the All-Star game. That was a big success. That's something the league is looking at in future All-Star games. Some people have even proposed implementing that in basketball at large and having that just be how games are played. And it's like, the fourth quarter kind of becomes like, it would be very exciting. It would just entirely change, the strategy of how basketball is played. And I think that's probably too drastic. But Adam Silver has shown time and time again that he's very progressive. He's very open-minded. He listens to a lot of people. He will evaluate every option and possibility. I think that's partially why this took so long for the NBA to come out with some type of thing. Like, it had been basically over a month that we knew the NBA was returning in some capacity. It just took so long for them to kind of finalize a plan and come up with something because Adam Silver was entertaining so many possibilities. So I do think that this is something that could happen in the future and it could be something moving forward. I think you bring up a good point, though, that I'm a little disappointed in. I think it should have been any team within 4 games of the 8 seed was put in a play-in tournament. This version that they ended up settling on was just, the 9 seed in particular. And you have a possibility here where certain teams, one being Portland, could have an advantage because they had already played more games. So they would have certain tiebreakers, depending on how they play out their schedules. So I do think that it would have been more exciting if any of the, because in the West, you would have had the 9, 10, 11, maybe even 12. And now it makes sense why you brought Phoenix and San Antonio back into the mix. But San Antonio already, LaMarcus Aldridge had this mysterious shoulder, surgery that now he's out for the playoffs. So San Antonio is going to get rolled. They might not even win a game in Orlando. So they're kind of, tanking. And I think it's just, you're going to maybe have players not showing up. So it is like, if you are the Suns, why do you care? Like, you're probably not making the playoffs. If anything, you're putting yourself at risk of getting corona or getting injured. And that's why you had, some of the lottery guys speaking out against returning. So I do think the league did implement something that's going to be interesting, but it would have been better to kind of go more in and having either reseeding 1 through 16, having some type of play-in tournament, maybe with both conferences for the 2-8 seeds. But I think doing this was kind of a vanilla outcome. It's still going to be interesting, but I think they could have done more. But maybe it was just too hard to pass with all the owners and them being against change and whatever. But I think it would have been more interesting to have what you had proposed. And I think it's something they should look at moving forward.
All right, so you cover the Clippers. It's very possible the Mavs face the Clippers in the first round. Obviously, there's a chance that both teams move in the standings, but as it stands now, they would match up. I'm curious, separate of that potential matchup, what's been the reaction as it pertains to the Clippers and whether this is an advantage, a disadvantage, health elements? What are the things that are a big part of the conversation with the Clippers right now?
So I think there's 3 parts to it. One, I think the Clippers have been arguably the most banged up of the elite teams. If you look at the top 6 or 7 teams in the league, the Clippers have had the most injuries and the most games missed of that group. So I think from a rest and recovery standpoint, they stand to benefit most from having all this time off. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George did not have typical off seasons last off season. Aside from making the move to LA, Paul George had 2 shoulder surgeries. Kawhi Leonard, was dragging his leg in the finals, and didn't really have that much time to rest that and recover from that. Started the year not really fully in shape, and still putting up 27 a night, but you've seen a progression from Kawhi athletically, especially on the defensive end throughout the season. So I think giving those guys, basically another offseason to kind of rest. Guys like Pat Beverly and Lou Williams, who are older, in their early to mid 30s, those guys have had to expend more energy because Kawhi and PG have missed games, been on minutes restrictions. So I think overall the Clippers are one of the teams that stands to benefit the most from this, from that perspective. On top of that, they were not going to have home court advantage if they played the Lakers or the Bucks or even the Raptors, if the Raptors made the finals. So I think that gives them a slight advantage in those potential series. now you don't have to play a game 7 on the road in Milwaukee or a game 7 at Staples against the Lakers. And I think in those hypothetical series, that could help the Clippers. And the third point is the Clippers have taken this postponement very seriously. They trademarked the phrase "win the wait," and while that's a little corny and kind of like a business catchphrase, they they sent the second they kind of knew this was happening, they sent personalized workout equipment to each player's house and apartment. Doc was on Austin Rivers' podcast recently, and Austin was talking about how like the Rockets have like a yoga session like once a week, while the Clippers, like everyone has like Peloton bikes and all bench press, all this stuff, and they've been doing weekly workouts on Zoom, for the bigs, for the wings, for the guards. Now they've been back at the facility doing kind of very selective training and stuff. So I think the Clippers have really taken this very seriously, and they've been very locked in. They've been very coordinated, had a lot of planning and structure with their plan during all this. So I think you look at all those three, factors of they've been banged up and now they have rest. They no longer have to play the two best teams in the league probably without home court advantage. And they've been taking this very, very seriously from a workout and training perspective. I think all three of those things point towards the Clippers stock going up in the postseason. And that's why, to me, I would say right now they're my favorite. I know I'm a little biased from covering the team, but I think on paper, when this team has been healthy, they've been just as good as any team in the league. And as of right now, as far as we're concerned, they are healthy. So I think going into a situation with no home court disadvantage or advantage, I think that probably favors the most talented team, which to me is the Clippers.
All right, so I don't think the Mavs have any chance if they match up against the Clippers. As a matter of fact, I've said on record, on radio here in DFW, the only team I think they could beat realistically is Utah, and I don't even think that matchup is that realistic. But, I mean, is there anything that jumps out to you about the Mavs-Clippers matchup? A lot of people here are just excited to see the Mavs in the playoffs and give Luka and Kristaps that experience, and maybe, give Luka the experience of going up against Kawhi or Kawhi guarding Luka on occasion. But what are the things that maybe stand out to you about that potential matchup, which I'm sure, people from the Clippers' point of view don't fear that matchup, I don't think, but what jumps out to you?
I think it's a deceptively competitive matchup. I actually did the first week of postponement. I don't know what to call it, stoppage, postponement, whatever. I did a in-depth series breaking down, from the Clippers side, the offensive matchups in a potential series, the defensive matchups in a potential series, and kind of did a back and forth with Tim Cato, my colleague, and a prediction. So my final prediction was Clippers in 5, but I do think it has the potential to be a very competitive 5-game series because Luka is so good, and it's just like, it's hard for me to see. I know it'll be his first time in the playoffs, but I just don't see a Luka-led team just being dominated that way. I also think Kristaps Porzingis, with the way he was coming on that last month and a half of the season, he can present a lot of issues for the Clippers. He did get a lot of open looks in the season series, and if he can shoot somewhere between like 38 to 40% from three, which he's capable of, he's a guy who can really stretch the floor, and the Clippers don't have a great, they probably have to put a wing on him, kind of like the way, teams would defend Dirk. You're going to have to put a wing on him, get into his legs, get into his dribble, and try to body him and push him out. I don't really think the Clippers can put a traditional big on him. The issue for Dallas in this series, there's two. They don't have anyone to guard Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi has dominated Dorian Finney-Smith. I had multiple clips on the offensive side for the Clippers of him just muscling Dorian Finney-Smith in the post, blowing by him, dunking on him. Like, it was really bad, and Kawhi pretty much got whatever look he wanted. And kind of the subplot to that is not only do they not have anybody to guard Kawhi, they don't have anybody to guard Paul George either. And now you're putting, if you are putting Dorian Finney-Smith on Kawhi, maybe they go Maxey. I think Maxey actually defended Kawhi the best of anyone in Dallas. But that's kind of a weird thing where now, where do you put Porzingis? Like, is he trying to protect the rim? Is he guarding Marcus Morris? Like, the Clippers just have so many weapons, but I don't think Dallas is a great matchup for Paul George either. And I think, if the Mavs really do focus on Kawhi, you could have Paul George kind of, now he steps up as the 30-point guy a night. And I just think the Mavericks' wing defense concerns me. Then the flip side of that is the Clippers are probably the best team in the league equipped to defend Luka Doncic. From Pat Beverly to Kawhi to Paul George. Rodney McGruder actually defended him impressively well during the regular season. If you saw, Luka still got his 27, 28, but he was shooting under 40% from the floor, under 30% from three. He did get to the foul line a lot, and that, I think, was from the Clippers being very aggressive with him. They were kind of like, we're going to rough this guy up, and if he gets into the paint, we're going to hammer him. We're going to send him to the free throw line, and sure, he might still get his points, but he's never going to get in a rhythm. And that was the biggest thing from watching it. Luka never got in a rhythm. And the Clippers really did a nice job of defending him in the pick and roll, being rough with him once he got into the paint. And I think it just kind of messed up the flow of the Mavericks offense. So we know that the Mavericks have a historic offense, one of the best offenses of all time. But if you can kind of cut off the head of the snake, make Luka really work for his points and be inefficient, the Mavericks aren't going to hum at that 120 offensive rating that they're capable of putting up. So for me, I just think the matchups heavily favor the Clippers. Maybe Porzingis steps up and is a monster, and that makes it a 5 or 6 game series. But for my money, I'd probably say it's a sweep or a gentleman's sweep. Competitive. I don't think the Clippers are going to destroy them, but I just think it's going to be a lot of close games that end up tilting the Clippers' way over the last 5-6 minutes in the fourth quarter.
All right. A big part of the conversation for the Mavs is the future and the additions they can make, adding a third star. And while this offseason was not supposed to be the year that they could do that in free agency, the following perhaps was the ability to add another max contract. Just curious, what do you think this pandemic is going to do from a salary cap standpoint moving forward?
It's going to affect the salary cap a lot. Some at first, within like the first month or so, like the salary cap is projected to be around 115, 116 million. Within the first month, that got knocked down to like 109, 110. Really, I mean, they're going to salvage it somewhat with having this postseason and having, games back on national TV and some of the advertising revenue that's going to come with that. But it could easily go down to like 100 to 105 range, which is a lot of money. I mean, it sounds like, $10 to $15 million, but that drastically changes how you structure a team. Losing $10 to $15 million in cap space is a tough blow. So I do think you'll see a very weird free agency this offseason where not a lot of guys are going to get paid. And there's only going to be, you might have like fewer than 10 guys making over like 12 to 15 million. Like it might be a lot of guys on 1-year deals and kind of rolling it over to 2021. From a Mavericks perspective, it's just not a great free agent class. Like this is not a great class to have a lot of money for. One guy I do think would fit very well with Dallas is Montrezl Harrell. And I think when you're thinking about the type of big you would want to put around him, it's Kristaps Porzingis, and that type of guy just doesn't grow on trees. Not every team has a Kristaps Porzingis, but Montrezl Harrell's weaknesses, is he's a 6'7" center. So you want another bigger guy who could protect the rim behind him or next to him. That's Kristaps Porzingis. On the other end, Trez is one of the best rollers and finishers in the league, but he can't stretch the floor. That's where you have Kristaps Porzingis as a pop guy. So I think those two would fit really well together. Just thinking about Luka and Trez in a pick and roll, or Luka and KP, and then Trez is kind of rolling on the backside or waiting on the weak side. Like that would be a very dangerous thing offensively. So I do think someone like Trez would be in their price range. I think he probably would have interest in going to Dallas, and I think that could potentially work. So he's someone I would keep an eye on. But Dallas, I think one of the things you see sometimes with these young teams that are up and coming is they will overspend on a veteran trying to make that next step. And it ends up not working out because, there's so few guys that are that impactful at that price range of a max or near max contract. So my one thing with Dallas would just be to be careful who they end up paying. And if they could get a guy like Trez at 15 million, 17 million, I think that's solid value. But once you start getting into the 20 million range, you really got to be careful who you're paying. I thought the Harrison Barnes contract was an example of that. That was a misstep from the front office. And I think just moving forward, they got to be careful who they put around Luka and KP because your cap space evaporates, and this could be a multi-year thing where the salary cap is lower now because of what just happened. So they got to be careful how they spend their money. And I would probably be more patient and wait it out versus spending money on guys this summer that probably don't deserve it.
All right, you can follow Jovan on Twitter. His name, Jovan Buha, Jovanbuha. He's got a really cool story out on Joakim Noah. Haven't heard that name in a while. You can find out what he's been up to. Jovan, thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me on, man.